Welcome to the second in the series of town talks, this one entitled Council's Next Chapter. My name is Mike Pickering, and I serve on the board of BMRA as the Director of Community Engagement, and I will be facilitating tonight's session. Our first session, which was entitled 2 Years In, featured Mayor Alain Soeva, Deputy Mayor Rob Potter, and Councillor Peter Bourguignon, discussing the progress of council in the first 2 years and identifying the challenges ahead. If you wanted to see what that was all about and you missed it the first time, you can go onto our website and get the recording. Tonight's session is entitled Council's Next Chapter and will feature a discussion with the BMRA Board and subcommittee members, several of whom are on the line already. Our primary intent tonight is to hear from you about your expectations of council for the balance of their term, what priorities should receive the most focus and investment, and what questions you would still like to ask about the council's next chapter. Thank you for those participants who took the time to send us their observations and questions in advance of the discussion this evening. Right now, we have 33 participants on the line. There should be more by the time we get through this evening. Joining us this evening to answer your questions are three members of the BMRA Board. We have Jim Torrance, who is, as many of you know, the president of BMRA, John White, who is the director of county relations, and Brian Harkness, who must be important because he's got a long title that says Director of Budget Review and Infrastructure. I'm not sure what else there is that he can take over, but there you go. From time to time, we may call on other members of the BMRA board who are joining us on the line this evening. Our intent is to use the output from our discussions tonight to subsequently meet with the members of council to summarize our learnings. There are two ways that you can participate in the discussion if you have a follow-up question or an observation that you would like to make. First is at the bottom of your screen to use the chat room, which is being actively monitored by John Milne, who will relay the content to me for inclusion in the discussion if appropriate. The second is to use the raise your hand function, and if you are recognized, please make sure to unmute your microphone before being asked to speak. We are scheduled to run our session tonight until about 6:30. So, without further ado, let's get on with our first question, which comes from a member of our audience tonight, and I'll ask John White to lead the response on this. It's a two-part question. Part A, the town has purchased land in the west near Goldsmiths on Highway 26. Are there plans for building a multi-purpose community hub on the property? And what issues will need to be addressed before that can be confirmed? Second part, what are the other plans for the additional acreage the town purchased in Thornbury? And I'll turn it over to John White at this time. John?
Thank you very much, Mike, and good evening to everyone, and thank you for joining us. Yes, the town recently completed a purchase of just a little over 32 acres at what is 113, or some will think of it as Peel and Highway 26. Our understanding is that this piece of land will be used for a quote unquote community hub. What all will be in that community hub is open to the people in town. There have been discussions to date, and we have seen recent activity in terms of leisure activities and TBM Future where the town is soliciting input. It's really going to be a question of what all the wants are. For instance, gyms, further ice facilities, pool exercise facilities, track facilities, curling. One of the things that I would remind people of is the fact in that part of town, because of our water table, there really are no basements, not feasible there. And gyms have high roofs. And so as we have seen on an issue called attainable housing, which I'm not going to steer into right now, I will say that the 3-story limitation could become an issue out there as well. But it will be 32 acres, sounds like a lot of land, but it's going to be based on what everyone wants to see in that facility. And that will be a major subject of town communication over the next year. In terms of the land purchase and such, um, some of that land may well be used to improve that intersection where 113 comes out to 26. At the Goldsmiths, as many people would know it, that area is targeted for some upgrade. I think in most of the plans that I've seen between MTO, county, and the town. And land needs are a critical part of improving all intersections. I'll also just quickly say that TBM has been buying land and will continue to be buying land for municipal infrastructure and services. Prior councils, while approving lots of development and should have been able to see the future, but did not undertake a land banking program to provide for the actual services to be located. And to that point, Grey County is in much the same situation here in the town of the Blue Mountains as well. So when we look at land that's available and people get upset about this, there has certainly been people talking about this on social media. When the Attainable Housing Project was first being discussed, the town put together a list of all of their pieces of land other than very small parkettes that could be used. And I think most people will remember that that was a very short list and not many locations. So we are going to see more land acquisition, and we will see a healthy, I hope, discussion about what we should build there. But numbers as to what that could be range anywhere from 50 to $100 million. So it's going to be a big project. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, thank you, John. We appreciate that, and that's a very comprehensive answer to our first question. Remember that if you have any other observations or questions that you might want to ask, just use the chat room or the raise your hand feature. The second question tonight also comes from an audience member. I'm going to ask Jim to kick us off here, although we'll ask Janet Findlay and Brian Harkness to jump in as well. The first question is, what is the town doing to control the pace of development? That's a loaded question, if ever I thought there was one. And can our infrastructure and services keep up with our growth? So I'll turn it over to Jim for your initial response. Jim?
Okay, thanks, Mike. Yeah, you're quite right. The first question, I think, well, both of the questions are somewhat loaded, given the significance of the issues. So we could probably take the rest of the time on those simple two questions if we chose to do so. You know, I think the whole question of is the pace of growth being managed effectively? It really, to me, comes down to a question of, you know, is it sustainable? I know part of the challenge is that there were developments that were approved in prior years that are just now kind of getting shovels in the ground. And so, you know, the current council and staff were not directly controlling or influencing those. But there are a lot of other issues that come into play. So Janet Findlay is on our planning subcommittee, and I was going to ask Janet to speak to this issue based on the insights that she has to share. Jen?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I was going to mention that I was just going to pick up on what you said about the previous planning measures that were used by councils in the past. And I'm thinking here of the subdivisions that have been approved years ago that we're now seeing developed. And I'm thinking particularly of Georgian Peaks. You all remember the long row of townhouses that we see as we drive along Highway 26. So there's an example of some planning that we don't really like to see anymore, but these are projects that are just now getting built. So what do we do to stop that kind of planning? How do we prevent that from happening in the future? And that's been a discussion we've had with the town. We've asked them in the past, in previous meetings with them, we've asked them, you know, how can we stop this from going forward, this kind of delay? And they've said that in the future there will be using controls such, they call them sunset clauses, and they're controls of number of years that you're allowed to have your planning approvals before they expire. So I think that's one example of where development control is coming to perhaps a better situation than we've seen in the past. Also, I think just to add one other point, that the planning department is fully fully staffed by planners who are paid by the development community. So it's something that is a positive, because they make sure that they have the planners that they need in order to manage control growth. So I think my view is that they're keeping up with the applications. It's more a question of how they're going about approving them. So if you'd like to talk about that a little more, we can, or we might want to just keep going and get to some of these other questions and come back to that. But that's certainly something to discuss at some point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Janet. And the second part of the question, can our infrastructure and services keep up with our growth? And Brian, I'll turn it over to you for that response.
Thank you, Mike, and hello, everybody. Welcome to our chat session. Can our infrastructure and services keep up? I'm going to break it into two parts. One, financial, and two is human resources. Financially, this municipality is one of the top 10 in all of the province. We have superb reserves. We have a very, very low debt borrowing percentage compared to our capital. So far, from a financial point of view, and the requirement to raise taxes to bring in infrastructure is not on the horizon, certainly as I've been watching the last number of budgets go through the town. As far as human resources are concerned, I think the town has done a better job. We have a very promising new director, or relatively new in the job. The president and I attended a meeting with him within the last month. We went through 30, 40, maybe 50 different projects to look at. The capital value is a stunning $120 to $150 million are being proposed between 5 years from now and 10 years from now. And some are a little more ready for shovel than others. But the point really is that the town is well aware that they are behind. So to answer one of the questions, we are behind in our infrastructure build out. They are addressing that, and we're going to see more shovels in the ground if in fact the human resources side of our town can get the projects ready for the shovels. And so I have a strong belief, and BMRA is watching it more closely. They've assigned me to sort of oversee that. And so I'll be reporting to you as members on a more regular basis as to whether they're successful in their planning. So I hope that starts to answer the question. As an example, we have a new water tower that needs to be built. The current one by the community center is rusting. It's past its useful life. So we're getting a new water tower. That's going to be financed in two different ways. One of it is the reserves that we have because we own the asset. And the second one is because of development charges, which are user charges, which aren't, of course, collected through taxes. They're collected through the development fee that all of us paid when we first bought a property. And so from a tax point of view, I don't see anything being added to our tax bill in the next little while as an example of one project. Okay, I'll hand it over to you again, Mike.
Okay. Yeah, Mike, I'm just going to add one last point with regard to the pace of development. I think the other factor we need to be aware of is that the county develops what they term a growth management plan, basically, which defines how much population is going to grow in different municipalities. I think it's a provincially mandated program. But basically, this month, they're going to be coming to the town with what they've defined as the growth that we need to accommodate. And so through the course of this year, we're going to have to keep track of how this serves to inform the town's housing needs and what the planning department determines should be done in response to it. So, there'll be more information coming on that, but I think it just speaks to one other factor in the whole pace of growth consideration, is that there are growth mandates that we receive from the county, and then we have to determine what we do from a perspective of intensification. So that's something that that will certainly be involved with this as the year progresses.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Before we move on to the next question that we had on our sheet, there have been a couple of questions come in. One is come to me through John Milne, and that is, could council provide a list of developments that have already been approved? I don't know if who would like to take this one, but could council provide a list of developments that have already been approved?
I guess I could jump in.
Yep.
On the town's website, there's an excellent map which provides an update of all the development projects. It's a fairly recent map, actually. It only came out about maybe a year ago. So it's quite useful, and I don't know how many people really know about it. And if there's a development project not included on our map, it's probably still in that phase where the developer is in to talk to the town, but nothing has gelled to the point where there's a formal application. Once there's a formal application, it will go on this map. And then if it's something that's involving a plan of subdivision or a condominium subdivision application, then the Grey County map, which is a similar map, will have the specific information, but you'll be referred to that. So one way or another, it's possible for everybody to get information about development applications in the town. And in terms of a list, I don't know that we actually have something from the town in a list form, but I certainly think the map is a very useful tool.
Okay, thank you, Janet. There's another question that's come in from Alan Nadler that I'd like to address before we go on to our next series of questions. Alan asks, have there been any updates to the Highway 26 bypass along the escarpment and improvements to the Grey Road 40/Highway 26 intersection? I don't know who, John White, you're going to answer that one. Thank you.
I'll take that. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mike. And to Alan, thank you for the question. And for some of you may not know, I'm also a member of the town's transportation committee. Bypass or alternate routes, as they're often called. There are three areas that people talk about. One of them would be up on the escarpment, which would be Grey 119. The county recently rebuilt that road, and in the process lowered the speed limit and lowered the capacity and capability of that road to handle traffic. That has led the town to undertake a program of where we're going to be doing traffic monitoring and developing data on a live basis 24/365, because the provincial rules call for certain levels of development based on your average daily traffic count. And I'll try not to be too boring on that. But some would say the county was very selective as to where they measured that on 119. As a result, they were able to save themselves millions of dollars, or not spend it here, millions of dollars in reconstructing that road to a level that would no longer support 80 kilometers an hour. In terms of the east end of the community, out near the Collingwood or Simcoe border, that really falls into what we call the Grey 21, Grey 19 corridors that run up and around the Blue Mountain area and such. Interestingly, today there was a special meeting of council, Grey Transportation Department, and the Transportation Committee looking at areas of rebuild in this area, particularly from Mountain Road up towards Scenic Cave roundabout. There is work being contemplated here, a lot of work actually. That road will move to a 4-lane basis under these plans. There are 2 new traffic circles looking to be going in, both at 19 and 21, and where the crossroads intersects. But it's a classic area where planning for this was not done in the past. County doesn't have enough land. There's a lot of things to be looked at. So these things take time. In the west end of town, some would probably know that the Ministry of Transportation a few years ago published a study strongly encouraging that a alternate route around Thornbury be developed. There is, I can tell you, work underway on this in the subcommittee of the Transportation Committee. We are anticipating having some discussions with Gray County about this in the spring. But basically, this will come down to what we call a road swap. In that currently the primary bypass in this area is Bruce Street and Marsh and Matilda. And the town hopes to transfer those roads back to the town from the county and to transfer other land or routes to the county, which they can then deliver or work on as an alternate route. But I'm sorry, there's nothing in the immediate future to unclog traffic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. I appreciate that. I'm going to move on to the next question for our panel, although I do want to acknowledge that Lynn Logan has asked a question, and I think John Milne has responded to it in the background. The next question tonight is also from an audience member, and it's how can council during its remaining term encourage diversity, aging in place, affordable rents, and invite youth to remain and contribute to the town of Blue Mountain? And I think, Jim, you are going to respond to this one, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think it's a really important question because I think it does speak to the long-term health and sustainability of our community. Because if we don't have diversity in terms of all the different age segments and lifestyles represented, then we aren't going to be as healthy a community going forward. So I know there are two initiatives that are taking place in 2021 that will contribute to this. One is the development of a sustainability plan. And they had a couple of, I think, false starts getting launched. The challenge is always with sustainability, not to make it boiling in the ocean. But I think they're looking at economic, environmental, cultural, and social considerations. The other thing that's being worked on this year, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, through the course of this discussion, is there's a review of our official plan. So I think both of those initiatives should be looking at how we can make sure the community remains what we want to have for the lifestyle that we're looking for. So, it really speaks to having a housing strategy that can accommodate growth, a business and economic strategy. Interesting questions that COVID has shown that working from home is a far more viable option for a lot of people than used to be anticipated. So there are new opportunities, I think, in terms of attracting business here. Targeted services, and also a facilities plan, family recreation, sufficient school capacity. So I'm hoping that through the course of 2021, these plans can be developed, engaging the community, as they certainly have started with the sustainability plan. I know the official plan, public engagement, is slotted likely for the fall. And interestingly, all that activity is going to lead up, I would think, in the first quarter of 2022 to the start of the next campaign for the new council election in the fall of 2022. So I think we'll also have the opportunity for some good discussion through the course of the campaign in terms of some of these issues that will really help determine the sustainability of our community.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Again, just as a reminder, if you have any other questions that come up as you hear these responses, please either share it in the chat room or raise your hand and we'll see if we can get to you. The next question this evening is going to be responded to by Brian, and it's a two-part question. Part one, is the town managing its finances responsibly? And is there evidence to support or refute that? And the second part of that question is, I understand that they're running out of office space at Town Hall. Is that true? And if so, what are the plans to address that? So Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, I'd like to, thanks for the question, by the way. I'd like to start with the second question because it's easier to answer. Has the town run out of space? I'm going to make this assumption that it's pre-COVID. The answer is yes, they've run out of space. We've done a short analysis over the last 2 years. The town has added 28 new equivalent full-time positions, and they are now having to lease space away from the town hall. That was before COVID, and I believe those leases are still in place as we speak. As far as COVID is concerned now, of course, our staff is scattered between the town's offices and working from home. So we haven't had an update as to where new staff would come. As mentioned earlier by other BMRA members, it looks like the town may be trying to have a multi-use facility, both at the east end of our municipality and the west end. And I would make the assumption that office spaces would go in there, and then they'd have to, instead of all being at town hall, they'd have to go into those various buildings. Now, there's no plan to build those right now, but I would think that would be a long-term plan. That being said, there is no plan that we asked that this year to town, and staff so far hasn't answered as to whether they have a direct plan or not, and what time frame that would be built in and how it would be funded. So the answer is yes again, and yes, they've tried to do that with extra space. So that's part one. Part two is the town managing its finances responsibly, and is there evidence to support or refute that? So as far as the town, I think they are, when I compare myself to, or our municipality, I should say on your behalf, when we look at other municipalities, and here's some examples. We have very small tax increases. Yes, we've had tax increases, but they're very small. Remember, we have a large seasonal group of people who come into the town, and they're not considered permanent residents, but the same, they pay their taxes, but they don't make demands on our services as much from a year-round basis. So far we've had limited tax increases. We have a very robust asset management plan. And what is that? Those are all the assets that town owns. As an example, bridges, highways, buildings, cars and trucks. All of those are being listed right now. And right now we have no warning signs that in fact this municipality is in financial trouble. I will suggest to you that if you take a look at the 400 odd municipalities around the province of Ontario, many of them are going to be in severe trouble as compared to our municipality. And I use the example of just Grey Highlands municipality. They had to raise their water rates, or were intending to raise them 50% over a short period of time, because their asset management plan wasn't funded well. As an example, our water rates help to pay for replacing our user fees, help for replacing our assets. That went down 5%, not this summer, but last summer it went down 5%. Our wastewater rates went up 2%, which shows that maybe we've got a little bit of replacement to do, but nothing terribly major. We will have to make some upgrades to our wastewater plant, and that's helping funding it again through reserves. So I think from what I've seen, the town is in good shape. There's nothing major coming. And if somebody else from Jim, you want to add to that, because I think I've tried to provide, I see our reserves in very good shape.
Yeah, Brian, the only thing I would add to that is you mentioned that there's been a significant increase in staffing levels over the last few years, and we recognize that there's been a lot of growth in the town as well. I think what we are asking to see, especially as they approach the 2022 budget, is we would hope that there be clear economies of scale that they can begin to capture, and not be in a position where the growth of number of staff would necessarily exactly mirror the percent in population growth. So that's the one thing I think that we want to be looking to council and staff to see, can they start to find some efficiencies to benefit from the growth, and not have to have our expenses go up exactly in lockstep with population growth.
Well, we've certainly warned them that staff has increased more than we think it should. We haven't had a response that I think is meaningful yet. So as you say, we're on the watch list, and we'll be watching in 2022 what they do. Thank you.
Okay, Ryan, thank you. Before we move on to our next question, let's cover a couple things that have come up. And just to give you a heads up, John Milne, you had something going on in the background with respect to the Leisure Activities Committee, and will we be bringing a plan to council before too long? John Milne, do you want to tell us a little bit more about that or a comment on that?
Thanks very much, Mike. Bill Abbott, who I believe is on the Leisure Activities Plans Committee, just sent me a note to point out that the committee will be bringing forward a plan to council shortly, and I will be surprised if the plan does not start to address the many questions that are arising around the use of the land at 26 and Gray Road 10 there.
Okay, good. Thank you, John. And Catherine Cunningham has a question for it, and it looks like John White, you probably would be the best person to address this. The question is, what is or was the result of the meeting this morning as far as the 4-lane road to Scenic Caves? Have they talked about a better shoulder and speed? John, would you be best to answer that one?
Sure, Mike, thank you. And thank you to Catherine for a question. Yes, there was the meeting earlier today, as I previously alluded to, and I was on for that meeting. This is a massive project. It's probably the largest roads project that Grey County has. It has a large number of moving pieces. It interacts not only with the town of the Blue Mountains, it interacts with Collingwood's areas of responsibility as well as Simcoe County. It has not been planned for. Grey County acknowledges that. They had not expected this. They had not planned for it. Budgets have not necessarily been set aside for it, although they acknowledge that a tremendous amount of development charges have been collected. In terms of a couple of things, yes, we will see what is 19 extending from Mountain Road up to the Scenic Caves roundabout go to 4 lanes. That is necessary based on the volumes and traffic studies. We will see that the roundabouts are equivalent to handle traffic on equivalent to a 4-lane road. And in a roundabout that is dealing with 4 lanes, it's a 2-lane roundabout. In fact, there's so much traffic, there was discussion of larger roads, but they don't see a need for that at least until 2030. They do not have sufficient land there. There was lots of discussion today between the town and others about how to handle what we call the active transportation, people walking, people cycling, not wanting to be on paved shoulders. Just recent county plans have indicated that there needs to be the county's alternative for these things is paved shoulders. It was politely pointed out today that that's not a real option on a 4-lane road. It doesn't integrate with what's already there. So it has gone on the list, but this will be, I don't have any answers as to what the final configuration is, other than to say at today's meeting, a lot of things from the Transportation Committee and from the town were put on the county's list and are going to have to be dealt with. But this is a huge project and is going to be a major subject of engagement by the BMRA over the next 12 to 24 months as designs are finalized and the tenders issued. Hope I've answered your question. Thank you.
Okay, and if there is a follow-up to that question, we'll let you know, John, but we appreciate the fact that you're giving us this news straight off the back of a meeting this morning. And, so it's nice and fresh out of the oven, so to speak. The next question that we have has to do with the Gateway Attainable Housing Project. And the question is, to what extent do we have any clarity yet on the capital budget and financial projections for the Gateway Attainable Housing Project? And I think, Jim, you were going to be on point to take this one.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And there's no doubt that, this is certainly one of the, I guess, the areas that has driven the most interest in the town, especially the last few months. So in terms of the question, clarity on capital budget, financial projections, we've got some more clarity. It's still far from complete. There's a recent tabling of the 2021 to 2023 Attainable Housing Corporation budget. It revealed some things that I think a lot of people have been asking for a while. And it started with It roughly identifies the required contribution from the town to make the project viable. And for quite a while, there was doubt as to whether or not the town would have to contribute anything. And I think it was probably not realistic, but that was the assumption we understood to be in place, at least for the initial phases of the scoping of this. What the budget showed is that the town will be contributing probably in the range of about 2.5 to 3 million. The cost of the property, the Gateway property, and clearing of it was about 1.8 million. There are some development charges that are going to be waived. And it gets a bit complicated because the project now is looking at a mix of attainable units as well as market rate units within the development. They will get development charges for the market rate units, but they'll be waiving them for the attainable units. So we've got a sense for what the town is going to have to contribute to make it viable. The construction cost is really just a placeholder now, and it's the biggest number of all. I think it's 18 or 19 million as a placeholder in the budget, but until they confirm exactly what the size and format of the build is going to be, they won't be able to finalize what the construction cost is. And then in terms of financial projections, there's some critical questions still to be answered. Specifically, what are the operating revenues going to be when they are up and running and actually are renting out units to renters? What will the operating costs be, and will they be generating a profit based on that model? And the profits required partly to repay the town the 1.2 million, the dollars we got from the county that the town forwarded to the Attainable Housing Corporation. They're going to be repaying that to the town over time. So they need to be generating some operating profits to be able to do that. And I think that, the point that we net out on is some money from the town up front to get it started, seed money essentially, is not a big surprise. What we don't want to see is a need for an ongoing subsidy for the rents. I think that once it gets launched, certainly the expectation is that it should be a self-sustaining operation. And the other point I'll make just in closing is it's true that we bought the land, but we aren't really committed yet. And I think we won't be committed until we see the construction estimate, the financial projections for operations. That should be shared with the public at some point later on this year, at which point I think the determination needs to be made. Is it a viable project going forward, or is it not? Because the reality is that the land that the town bought is going to maintain its value. There's not a lot of other sunk cost. And so we still have not yet hit the go, no go decision point. That's going to be coming up later in the year. And that's when I think, the really clear picture needs to be provided in terms of how all the numbers come together. So, we'll certainly be continuing to track with this. I've had involvement with the Community Design Task Force that's trying to give input in terms of, what would be viable built form options, as it's called. We know that we don't want a building on the entranceway to the town that is not going to be visually appealing. So that's part of the overall set of criteria. Anyway, there's a lot more to follow. We're starting to get some of the insights on the numbers side of it, but we're not quite at a decision point yet, which is probably a good thing for everybody.
So there's no decision been made yet. And although a lot of people feel like Gateway is a fait accompli and we're going to be moving ahead with it, you're saying that's not necessarily the case.
It's not necessarily the case. And I'll just make one other point that I think that because Gateway got out of the gate first, that, this is the first attainable housing project that's been contemplated. I think people get the sense that Gateway is the attainable housing strategy. And in the reality, Gateway is an element, it's a component of what needs to be a broader attainable housing strategy. I just think it's unfortunate that the broader strategy has not been clearly laid out so people can understand the role that Gateway will play in terms of providing attainable housing and what other elements are likely to be built into a broader strategy. So that's another thing that we're hoping will continue to get more clarity in that regard as well. What's the full slate of attainable housing initiatives that are being contemplated? Gateway being certainly the highest profile one right now, but it's not in and of itself the complete strategy.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Jim. Much appreciated. The next question comes in on the back of the observation that we seem to have a lot of consultants hanging around the place. And the question is there an opportunity for the town to leverage the expertise of residents more than they have until this point? So, Brian, I think you are going to respond to this one here.
As I have, thank you, Mike. I have 2 points. I think the most visible one is this council has enabled 13, I'll say that again, 13 different committees. And councillors sit on all councillors sit on all of the committees, and various ones duplicate themselves in the committees. So those committees are the quickest way that we as residents can participate. You just heard from John White. He sits on the transportation. Jim was on the task force for attainable housing. We have a budget review committee, and we constantly interact with the town. So that's one way we're doing it. Unfortunately, now that we have 13 committees, the 2 items that we find come from that is, one, it keeps the councillors extremely busy going in and out of the various committees. And second of all, now these committees need support. The cost of that in the budget for 2021 is I'll say that again, $850,000 worth of overhead has been put into the 2021 budget. So we've got good things. We've got a lot of council committee members that are advising council and providing expertise. But then there's an overhead associated with it, administrative costs. So that's part one. Part two is our public meetings, whether they be planning, transportation, zoning, whatever they are. I find it's really interesting listening to our residents, and the more probing and provocative questions you ask, the more that the councillors pay attention. We had the mayor on in another forum, and he said he would like to tap even more of the expertise associated with our residents. So volunteer, provide your input, and good things will come. Thank you.
Yeah, Brian, just let me ask a follow-up to that. What do you think is the best way for our local residents with expertise to actually volunteer for these? What's the process that they can use to get involved in this?
I believe you can either email the mayor or the clerk of the council and provide a very short summary of maybe your interests or maybe your expertise, and they'll find a committee, because there are 13 of them. I've never been in a municipality that's had so many people involved. I mean, that's one of the great things about our municipality is how much engagement we have, and look at what we've got. 50 people engaged in just this particular conversation. I think it's wonderful to all of you out there listening, but I think you have to make yourself aware to the town that you have an interest. I hope that answered the question.
Yep, that does, Brian. Thank you. That's appreciated. The next question takes us out of our focus on council and into Grey Council. And it's for John White to respond to. It says, my understanding is that Grey Council was asked to establish a fiscal and budget review committee. Was this ever moved forward as an item by Grey Council, and where do we stand today with regard to getting more value for our money for the county tax contribution? There's just a small question for you to respond to there, John.
Yes, thank you, Mike. I'll try to keep the answer under 3 hours. The short answer is Grey County does not have and has not taken up our suggestion to have a fiscal or budgetary review committee. And moving on to how do we get better value for what we contribute to Grey County? So the first thing I'd just like to say is that for every dollar of local taxes that someone pays in the town of the Blue Mountains, they should know that 40 cents of that stays in the town of the Blue Mountains. That is our municipal or lower tier tax base. Another 40 cents goes to the county and 20 cents goes to the Board of Education. In total, we pay about 27% of the county costs we have about 11% of the vote. It's based on the size of our voters list, not based on our contribution. That is not the same everywhere, but it is the case in Grey County. But I would say that, interestingly enough, in terms of how conservation authorities work, your vote is proportionate to the dollars contributed. The BMRA has made a very conscious decision starting last year to become much more focused on county issues on a continuing basis, to have a constant and consistent engagement. Previously, we were much more, I think it's fair to say, issue-oriented rather than overall maintained. However, to do that, we need a partner who wants to come to the party. And I would say that Grey County has not really shown itself to be a willing partner. We are unusual to county councils to have such a diversified group like the Ratepayers Association here are prepared to engage them across the scope of issues. And they don't like that very much. And others involved don't like that. And our plan has been to do the following things to get your better value. First off, we are working to obtain better information and data all the time, so we can engage these professionals in a way that maybe we haven't been able to. We are taking a consistent and constant approach to engaging them, but we're also looking beyond that. We are looking to start to engage the province. The province is our master, whether our master here locally in the town of the Blue Mountains or for Grey County. And we are taking steps now to develop within the province a file on this subject. We're talking about the issues. We will be talking about the issues with them, making them aware, and they are going to have to look at this at some point. So we are very conscious of getting value for your county tax dollar, and we are changing our strategy and engaging with them. If they'd like to engage with us, it will help, but it's not going to stop us moving forward. Hope I've answered that question. Thank you.
Okay, just to follow up on that, John, you said a couple of times that they don't like it or they don't like us or whatever. Could you kind of put a finger on what is it exactly that causes them not to like us, especially given that we're a major contributor?
Well, I think it's fair to say that they love the money that comes in, and the other municipalities, the other 8 municipalities certainly enjoy that funding. But Grey County has never had, within Grey County, there have never been ratepayer types associations. They are not used to having this type of engagement from ratepayers. All of this is totally foreign to them, particularly when it's not a group coming forward saying, we want a park or we want an intersection changed. To engage with someone across the scope is not what they're used to. And it's very unsettling for them. And frankly, we are unique in that regard in this province.
Okay.
Mike, I was going to add just a couple of things to
Sure.
that. Just because the county, as John said, is becoming more and more an area of focus for us. So the first thing, in terms of the point that they're not maybe hugely receptive to our efforts to gain insight and access to information with them, the reality is that there's never been a huge amount of oversight, in our view, of the work that county staff does, because you've got county council, but that's the mayor and deputy mayor from each of the 9 municipalities, and their day jobs are to look after their municipality. So for instance, when our town does its budget planning process, they spend 4 days reviewing the budget. We think it could maybe be a bit less, but they spend 4 days doing the budget. Whereas at the county, it's like a 4-hour exercise. And the reality is that there's just not that much oversight for the work that's being done. And we're pushing to get more accountability and transparency with the county. And as John says, they're not really used to that. The other point I wanted to make in terms of getting value for money and what's going to happen going forward, and I'll try to make this relatively concise and comprehensible, but the province was doing new assessment values for all residential properties. It was supposed to be completed 2020, and the tax impact was going to play out in 2021. With COVID, we think it's going to be delayed until next year's taxes. And so all the properties in the province will have new valuations based on what's happened in the market. So as you can imagine, the increase in the percent value of Town of Blue Mountain residences is going to be a lot more significant than the rest of the county. And we're kind of guessing it could be 50% for us versus maybe 15% for the rest of the county. So the question is, why should anybody care about that? Well, our taxes are based on the primary elements are two factors. It's the mill rate that the town sets times the assessed property value that determines how much town taxes you're paying. If our property values go up a lot because the assessments have been updated, the town can adjust its mill rate so that we're not getting whacked by a significant increase because of the increase in the property value. So they can moderate whatever impact on our taxes would happen for the town portion. The other 40% that John references, the dollars that go to the county applies one mill rate across all municipalities. So they won't bring the mill rate down in response to Town of Blue Mountain resident owners having their assessments go up. So we have a real concern that the impact on the taxes we pay to the county could be significantly increased by the new assessments coming in if there's not something done to try to figure out a way to moderate the impact on us. I mean, we did back of the envelope calculations that said for someone paying $6,000 currently in property taxes, they might see an $800 to $1,000 increase because of the impact of the assessments in the county mill rate. So this is looking forward to 2022. There's a lot more analysis and discussion that is going to have to take place to get a handle on it. But one of the issues we have with the county is very much the risk that the dollars we pay to the county could be increasing significantly, and we want to try and get in the way of that occurring. So.
Okay, thank you, Jim. A question coming from the back channel here, and I'll say that John and Jim should be on tap for this one. It says many on council ran saying that they would change the relationship with the county. That's what they ran. That was the platform that they ran on. The question here coming in from our audience is, why haven't they been successful in changing that relationship?
John, do you want to offer an opinion?
Well, it's we represent around the table when they're just voting without a proportionate representation. We represent 2 of 18 votes, so you can do the math. When it's proportionate, it's even a little less than that, based on voting list. There is not an interest in Grey County and most of the municipalities in Grey County to see much change. The dollars flow, and in fact, the changes that Jim alludes to that we could see next year, we've been seeing these for the last number of years. And if you go through the other municipalities' budgets, it has allowed them to keep much more money in their own towns and spending on things like in Hanover, big new rec centers and other projects have been huge. And they are not interested, to put it very probably politically incorrect, they are not very interested in seeing the tap or the golden goose stop laying eggs that flow their way. It is going to be an issue that only the province can fix. People are not going to vote against their self-interest in a manner like this. Jim?
And I'd just add, it's interesting that in terms of effort by our council to try to create a more constructive relationship with the county, there was a county Town of Blue Mountains task force that had been struck with the intent of trying to find ways to address some of the issues and concerns Town of Blue Mountains had. Well, the county closed that task force down. And that's one of the reasons why John and I, with our subcommittee, have been working on creating deputations, other communications to send directly to county council, because there isn't that forum of the county Town of Blue Mountains task force. So we have to go directly to the mountain now, so to speak. And I would say that I think our council has made good effort to represent our interests as aggressively as they can, try to hold the county as accountable as they can. So I think our council is making effort to represent us effectively. It's never going to be a truly collaborative relationship because of the nature of the funding model that John was alluding to.
Okay, so it doesn't seem like if in the 2022 election, if people say, I'm going to run on the fact that I'm going to be able to change this relationship, that there's not much wiggle room there.
Let me just say one thing, Mike, to be fair, for instance, one of the things that our mayor and deputy mayor pushed through now is there was no record of these votes going 16-2 in the past. And they did force through the fact that they have to have recorded votes now. So they are making small progress, but it is steadily chipping away at the mountain, as Jim refers to. And regularly, rarely is there a meeting where in particular our mayor is not pointing out to them the fiscal imbalance and these points. So we're trying, but we have a very big and steep hill to climb.
Yeah, that's pretty obvious. And I think going back to your issue of the golden goose and how nobody wants to get rid of that, it's quite obvious why people wouldn't want this change. And just as before we leave this point, David Fletcher has a question. Why has the council not addressed these issues with Queen's Park? Is that something that either Jim or John could respond to? Yep, Jim. John, sorry.
I would say that this council may be more so than ever before because of the previous role that Councillor Sampson had as a Minister of the Crown in Ontario, and his connections there, has been much more engaged and has had more doors open for conversations. And I have personally been at meetings which have occurred when cabinet ministers have visited this area, where I've heard them talking about the problems, the issues, and they understand, they're seeing what goes on and they're seeing the imbalance. But this is like trying to stop a ship or turning in the open ocean. You don't do it on a dime and it takes time. And the reality is, even if we just froze the situation today, the costs of Grey County and what they're facing, because they have a huge infrastructure backlog, is going to be traumatic for some of these municipalities to have to grapple with, like Grey Highlands, which had to put through a 50% increase in their water usage. So I do appreciate the province has to balance off a little bit how hard they get hit and the timing with which they get hit.
Okay, Jim, do you want to add anything?
No, I think the interest of, I think we have some more county discussion coming up later on, so we don't want to pile on just yet. In fact, the next question touches briefly on county as well. So
yeah, well, the next question looks at whether or not there is an update on high-speed internet in the area, and exactly somebody's asked, what is Rabbit, and how does it spelled RABIT, and how does this tie into the high-speed internet issue? And I think Jim, you're going to touch on this.
Yeah, and we haven't been directly involved in this, but certainly I'm aware that I believe under the leadership of Deputy Mayor Potter, it's a town initiative to try to determine ways to most effectively build out rural broadband internet access. I know that they're in the scoping stage. He's been engaging potential local contributors to a solution, so they're working to try to come up with a made in town of Blue Mountains solution for rural broadband access. And I make the point about it being a town-led initiative because there is another project called SWIFT, which is the Southwestern Ontario Internet, whatever. The county is kind of, it's our representative. And our understanding is the whole effort's been moving at a fairly glacial pace. Not sure that Town of Blue Mountains will benefit, at least not in the near term. But again, we're contributing our 28% of the cost for that effort as well. So it's a bit of a thorn in our side as well. But I will say that Rabbit, which our town is driving, seems to have showing some positive momentum. We'll have to get an update, I think, from Deputy Mayor Potter to understand how it's evolving and the kind of progress it's making.
Okay. Before we move on to the next question, we're actually going to go back with one for a second, Jim, because there's been a lot of correspondence come in through the chat room on this from David Fletcher and Stephen Granger, June Porter. Just a couple of the points that they're raising here. David says, my correspondence with both the Premier and Minister Clark has said that they have not received any official correspondence on this issue. And Stephen says, can the BMRA not contact the provincial ombudsman on this fiscal imbalance? And June Porter says, how can the public help us in this respect? What can we do to lobby Gray and the provincial government? So I don't know whether there's a lot of questions swirling around this whole thing.
Yeah, and I think they all basically relate to the matter of how do we engage with the province and how do we start to make our case with the province. And so that is next on the list of things to do for our county subcommittee. I think it's the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing is the logical target for a communication. And so what we're doing is working on a message in terms of explaining the situation, explaining the inequity of the situation that we face. I think it's got to be fairly rare for a municipality within a county to bear as disproportionate a share of the total county tax levy as Town of Blue Mountains does. So we are going to be going directly to the province and sending our message along to them. And it's not going to be something that is changed in the near term. It is kind of the Queen Mary, as I think as John alluded to. But I think we recognize we need to be taking a series of steps to make sure that this is a recognized issue and concern at the provincial level. And I think the message that we want to impart is, in our view, it's actually a very inefficient management model for this region. It's the extra layer of government. What kind of value is it adding? And I know that the provincial government started with trying to find efficiencies in regional government, got sidetracked with both pushback and then COVID. But I think that there is a benefit for the province if it starts to take a look at how counties are operating and whether there are inefficiencies that could be addressed. So the short answer is going to the province and expressing our issues and making our case is certainly the next step we have in our strategy vis-a-vis the county.
Okay, and as June Porter points out in one of her comments, the next provincial election, if it's in June of 22, this should be a huge issue for the candidates to consider and build into their candidacy.
Yeah.
Okay, I think John White, I'm going to skip the next question because you've already talked to this one. What is being done to manage capacity issues for our roads? 26 is overburdened and the 1921 corridor desperately needs improvements. But I think by and large, you've already covered most of those points. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. The only quick comment I would make is that the town itself has started its master transportation plan. This is a document that we are periodically required to do by the province and put in place. We have started that off. It is an example whereby we did hire expertise into the town rather than just a consultant to manage this, although we have hired a consulting firm to work with us on a variety of parts, but we have brought in-house expertise ourselves. Probably the biggest change compared to other municipalities around us, municipalities, whether it's local government like Collingwood or counties like Simcoe or Gray, or our neighbors like Meaford and Gray Highlands, have always done these as a silo, just for themselves, only on the roads that are directly under their control. And our council, to their credit, has taken a position that no, we are going to want to do this in cooperation and communication with all of our partners around us. And we are going to look at all of the roads, whether they are county, provincial highways, or municipal roads, to come up with a working plan that will actually function for us in the future. One of the great dustbins of history is filled with produced master transportation plans that go nowhere. And I give great credit to our council for saying we are not intentionally going to add to that dustbin anymore. Thanks.
Okay, I love that quote, one of the great dustbins. Well done, John. If Terry Keller is available, I think I see his name up on the screen. Next question goes to Terry Keller, who is our board member who has specific responsibilities for the STAs, short-term accommodation. And the question is, I understand that new regulations are being developed to control STAs. Where exactly does that effort stand right now? So Terry, let's bring your face up on the screen and let you have at it with that one.
Thank you, Mike. As he mentioned, Mike mentioned that I'm Terry Keller and I chair the Short-Term Accommodation Committee for the BMRA. The town has been working on a new licensing bylaw for the last 2 years and has scheduled a public meeting for April the 19th at 5 p.m. It will be live streamed, so if you care to get in and watch it, please do. And you can participate too. The town has over 270 licensed SDA units. Most are located where they're permitted, but over 50 are in zones where they are prohibited, but exist because of provincial grandfathering laws. Our committee has been involved in trying to encourage the town to include in the bylaws rules to better protect neighbors of the grandfathered STAs in our residential areas. We see some good in the current proposals, like no outdoor hot tub use after or pool use after 11 p.m. But we still have concerns that the grandfathered units need to be held to a higher standard for noise and nuisances and than what the town has proposed so far. We would like to see a reduction in occupancy load, better parking rules, and there are insufficient fines against the owners for bylaw violations. These are some of the issues that we will address with the town at the public meeting. If you have any problems with your next door neighbor who is an STA, then please call me. My email is on the BMRA website and I'm listed in the phone book. Thank you.
Okay, Terry, and you've been a champion of this STA process for some time, so we appreciate the efforts that you make on behalf of those people who are inclined to have neighbors that want to party in their pool or hot tub after 11 o'clock at night. So thank you for that. The next question, I think, Jim, you're going to lead the response on this one. What progress and further steps are being taken to track the use of all water being treated by Blue Mountains, and how much water usage continues to be unaccounted for? So, Jim, if you would kindly respond to those.
Yeah, I think that, this is an issue that I guess we all became aware of over the last few years, that there seemed to be significant water loss, I guess I would call it, where the water would go into the system but wouldn't end up going through the meters to be tracking usage. And so we know that operations is taking a much closer look at this. One of the things they're doing, I know they're going to have CCTV, closed circuit TV analysis of old water lines for leakage. We believe that it used to be probably north of 30% that seemed to have been lost through the system, which we're assuming had to do with old pipes, maybe people not being on meters effectively. And our understanding is that it's probably down to the high teens now, but that the town is still making a concerted effort to try to really track down the significance of the issue and seeing how to rectify it. Whether that results in bringing our water bills down at some point in the future, I can't really predict that, but at least it is an issue that's being looked at, because it's pretty hard to fathom or accept the fact there was as much wastage or lost water as had been the case. And it really was something that I think the town was slow to address over the course of the past few years. We believe they're taking a more serious look at it now and are solving some of those issues, but the water system is pretty critical, and getting that sorted out needs to be a high priority for them.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. And the next question is for John White. And I think this is a particularly important question. It comes in from one of our members. It says, while it's nice to make deputations for county council, the fact that no one will hear them speaks volumes. These inequities have existed for a long time. The real question is what other options are available to the ratepayers that may be more impactful and more urgent. So, John, do you want to take a swing at that one?
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, it's a big question, and it's a big part of, frankly, my job on the board is to come up with new and better ways to work around or draw attention to the whole county issue. I'm going to list 4 things that we're doing that are part of our plan or what's going on that's a little different than what's happened in the past. One of them is that people may remember up till about 4 years ago, there was nothing called a public comment period in the town of the Blue Mountains. Now, every meeting has public comment periods, actually, not just at the beginning of the meeting, but also for sections, so that the public can have an opportunity to make comments. Also, agendas and forward plans are released well in advance so people can see what's coming and have an opportunity to make a comment before the period to register has been cut off. In the county, that's not it's not the case. They don't release to us what's coming. We have to make a request for a deputation before we get the agenda. And if we miss it, well, we've missed it. We will be engaging them on their procedural bylaws to encourage the addition of a public comment period, for instance, and other moves that people now take for granted in the Blue Mountains. So that's one of the things we're doing. Number 2, which we take no credit for, but will shine a brighter light, is that very shortly, if not already, Rogers, when I say already next week, Rogers Communication is going to begin broadcasting the Grey County Council meetings, much like you see Collingwood Council broadcast or Simcoe, and that will have some effect. The other thing we have done is we have started this year identifying all of our local media and sending out press releases on stories and issues. That takes time to cultivate those contacts. It takes time for them, but we're trying to bring that along again to shine brighter light. And then finally, it's the area of provincial engagement, which we've touched on already. That is to build a file of multiple issues, not just a single issue profile, and to be in touch with ministers of different areas, to the authorities which are reviewing and granting, making grants and funding fulfillment to the county in those areas. We will be much more a force in that area than we have ever been in the past. So those are the 4 things that we're going to try to do and work on doing as we sit here right now.
Okay.
And when we need, sorry, just let me say,
Yeah.
we will come out. When we come out with things, we will be advertising that, communicating that to members with who to write to, how to reach them in support of that. Sorry, go ahead, Jim. Thank you.
Sorry, the other thing I was going to mention, John, and this relates to the deputation or the position paper that we put together on the uploading of services. So the idea that services that are currently delivered at the town level might be shifted to the county level. And we gave a paper that said, in theory, it sounds great, but it shouldn't be done in a way that disadvantages any individual municipality. Meaford has expressed or initiated an exercise to look at the possibility of uploading waste management services. It's hard to see how that could provide benefit to the town of Blue Mountain, since we have our own functioning waste facility. And so, you know, that was a concern, because part of our message was you shouldn't be looking solely at shared services within one county as the best way to find efficiencies and improvements. So something that's come to our attention in its early days, but the mayor of Collingwood, Brian Saunderson, is putting together a Southern Georgian Bay group, which would include Meaford, Town of Blue Mountains, Collingwood, Clearview, and I think Wasaga as well. And the intent of that exercise is indeed to take a look at, are there certain services or even facilities that would logically be positioned so that those geographically aligned communities could work together on some of those things. So they've only just started that initiative, but it's very much in line with what we have been proposing, which is don't assume that shared services have to happen across all of Grey County. And as we all know, we're kind of stuck in the corner we're more logically aligned with those other communities. So at least now there's an effort underway to take a look at, are there opportunities to strike some shared services agreements outside of the Grey County boundary. So, you know, depending on how this evolves, we may even see if we can get either Brian Saunderson or our own politicians to speak to this initiative if it moves forward and gains some traction.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
To be, just for a second, Mike, to be very
Yep.
polite to Jim, because he is too kind to say, we do position papers, and on this subject of uploading of services, and in particular waste, Grey County would not let us make a deputation on that point. So we are trying, but it's a steep hill to climb.
So the observation that was made in raising the question is absolutely true. Back for a moment, to Jim, to your question on water, and Bill Abbott's has raised another good point that extra sewage water is leaking is also an expensive issue in this town that we're trying to work on, for example, with projects like the Elma, Alice, Victoria, and Louisa reconstruction. Any comment on that from either of you?
John, do you have any insights, or Brian, on that matter?
Well,
I'd like to speak up if I can, John. When we reviewed the infrastructure, again, this is infrastructure that the town owns, so we're in the operations department under its director. There is an ongoing cost to the town of around $1 million, not a year, but over a period of time. And I'm thinking it was 4 or 5 years, like it's $100,000 to $200,000 a year. And what they do is they send a camera down every single waste pipe. They can't do it to a water pipe, but they can do it to our waste pipes that carry the wastewater. And they're looking at the conditions as for 2 reasons. One, do they need replacement right now? What condition are they in? Make a notation of that and put it into our asset management plan as to the possibility of replacing sometime in the future. So I would like to say that from our perspective, the town is being aggressive in the sense of photographing every waste pipe that it can get its hands on to try and find exactly what the conditions are. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, Bill, I hope that answers the question for you, and good. Thank you for bringing that up, Brian. John, did you have something else that you wanted to say before? Or?
I was just going to say that it's interesting to note that the sewers in that area, based on the casting on the manhole covers, went in 1926. They're almost 100 years old. And the town, which should have been about a 3-month exercise to determine the engineering necessary to upgrade, has been at it for over 2 years. I've been taken on tours as part of transportation for the road works, and there are literally 4-inch binder after binder full of all the specials that were done, or do me a favor, or don't connect this way or that way. Really, it's a story of what happens when you don't follow standards. And Brian's right. The work they've had to do to trace all of this, and when they fix it, but we're going to see a lot more of this in town as they go through these old areas. Elma, Louisa, Victoria, that is not unique to this town, unfortunately.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, John. And before we move on to our last question for the evening, there was a comment made through the back channels here that Toronto has banned leaf blowers, which throw up a lot of dust into the air, which, especially considering COVID-19, is a very bad idea right now. The question is, can we ban leaf blowers in this municipality?
Well, it's the first I've heard that suggested.
So you're going to run right away and put away your leaf blower?
Yeah, I suppose that'd be one step to take. But it's an interesting, certainly the noise issue with leaf blowers is another consideration, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The final question that we have is, and I think Jim and John are probably going to want to weigh in on this one. Shouldn't we move to a ward system of municipal government, since that would make it easier to engage individual councillors on relevant issues?
Yeah, this is something that came up in discussion, I know, around the last election. And then has kind of frittered away to some extent since then. with the upcoming election in 2022, I think it's probably an interesting idea to raise again. I think certainly my perspective is the benefit of a ward system is you've got a clear idea of which counselor you would go to for an issue in a particular part of the town of Blue Mountains. So I don't know whether it's something that would be considered again, but as I say, I think it's something that we should raise as part of that next campaign. And also, we can continue to have some discussions with council members as we interact with them, just to get a temperature check for it. But as I say, I certainly think it's worth consideration and doing more exploration on it.
Okay. John, was there anything else that you wanted to jump in on as far as this proposal that we should move to a ward system of municipal government?
Mike, not too much other than to say that I think historically with our seasonal resident base or weekend base, it may have been difficult to have found a large enough pool of individuals living in some areas on ward lines. That is changing. And while it may be too late to implement anything for 2022, I think as our population continues to increase on a full-time basis, it is something that'll be looked at much more in the future.
Okay, thank you, John. In a second, Jim, I'm going to come to you for closing comments, but that concludes our questions that have come up from the BMRA members prior to this meeting and those that have come up during the meeting. I'd like to thank John Milne for his work in the background there and shooting all the messages to me. We're bumping up against our close time now, so I think it's probably best that we just finish there. And Jim, I'll ask you to provide us with any closing comments on our session, council's next chapter. So,
sure.
Yep.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for your efforts again in terms of providing your stellar moderating, facilitating efforts on our behalf. And I'd like to thank all the members of the board and our subcommittees who both contributed to the discussion at this session, but also who do a lot of really solid work in terms of representing the interests of the town and working very proactively with council and staff to try to make sure that the right things are happening. And I'd like to thank our members, both who have joined us for this evening, but also, we've got a significant base of members. They're very engaged in the goings on in the community. And I think as a result, they're a very receptive audience in terms of supporting and responding to the work that we're doing. So I guess this is the second of our town talks that we've held so far in 2021. It's our intent to have a number more, probably every 4 to 6 weeks. We'd like to have another session. We've talked to a couple of key town staff about possibly participating in future sessions, be it Nathan Wessendorp with the planning area, as well as Sean Carey, Director of Operations. So I think that infrastructure and planning are clearly two of the areas that are going to be of high interest to us all going forward. So again, we appreciate the support and attendance we've had at these sessions we've held. We'll be putting out a summary in terms of some of the key issues that we've heard through the course of the discussion tonight. And also the other thing we will do is, based on some of the questions that have been tabled, this is information that we'll take to council members as well, because I think that they need to be aware of the concerns and issues that are being raised by town residents, and it's a great forum for us to be able to identify those. Lastly, Crystal Kaufman, who's been our technical support for these initiatives, thanks again for your fine efforts. So with that, I'll leave it. Just again, thank you everybody for participating and joining us, and we look forward to conducting a number of these through the year.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Jim, and everybody else have a great evening and an early spring, which comes this weekend for us all. Okay, happy St. Patrick's Day tomorrow for those who are Irish. Okay, take care.